if you're someone who wants to get more serious about video, well, you may have heard about CINE lenses. Well, in today's video, we're going to talk about the difference between photography and CINE lenses, and in which case you should use which. If you don't know who I am, my name is Thierry Gibralta, and I'm a full-time photographer and videographer based in Tokyo, Japan. Now, I use in my work both photography and cinema lenses, but what are the key differences between them, and when should you use which? First, let's talk about build quality and weight, right? Photography lenses are typically made to be easy to handle, very portable, and very easy to interchange. Especially if you're a prime user like I am, you want something that is easy to carry around, that will not slow you down, and that will allow you to just capture any moment. Now, this doesn't mean that photography lenses are completely made of very cheap and fragile material. It is not the case. It is still robust, but the emphasis is on having something that is portable, light, and that will not slow you down. Now, on the other hand, here you have a CINE lenses that is much heavier, but much more robust. It is built like a rock, and it is not necessarily made to be handled by one person. In fact, that is why on production sets, they have an AC, assistant cameraman, that will basically handle the lenses and make sure that they are changed and handled properly. CINE lenses are supposed to be robust, resistant, and functional in any environment. Those lenses are really meant to be durable, reliable, even over really extensive use, right? You don't want to go on production and have a lens that suddenly has an issue. And this is why they are so thick, so robust, and overall so heavy. Now, when it comes to focus control, well, photography lenses, especially modern lenses, have autofocus. You are able to connect to the camera and your lens is able to directly communicate to the camera through the mount to be able to autofocus, if that autofocus works properly. Now, of course, you also have a focus ring, and that focus ring usually is focused by wire, meaning that it is an electronic signal that will move the motor whenever you move the focus ring on your lens. Now, this is okay for fine adjustment. The problem with that method is that if you want to pull focus from one subject to another and really repeat the same speed as well as the same focus point, it gets trickier to do so with such a lens because you don't have full control over how your lens is controlling the different elements and making them move basically with the electronic signal. On the other hand, on the CINE lens, well, it's completely mechanical. You don't have any piece of electronic that control the focus on the lens. And as you can see, it is also marked very precisely for you to exactly have an idea of where the focus is at any given time by just looking at the lens. Now, on the focus ring, you also have some indentation that have very precise size and that are meant to be connected to either a manual or an electronic focus motor for you to be able to control the focus either directly or remotely. Now, the cinema lenses also have an finite rotation when it comes to their focus, and the focus ring is usually very smooth, so it allows for a really smooth focus pull between a subject that could be on your foreground and your background. One more important aspect and one more important difference when it comes to photography and cinema lenses is that when you pull focus on your cinema lens, it is important that your focal length doesn't change, which is not always the case on a photography lens. When you pull focus on a photography lens, as you can see on the XF33mm f1.4 Fujifilm, the focal length changes a little bit. However, on this 25mm from DZO, the Vespid Prime of DZO, well, you can see that the focus breathing, and that is the phenomenon that we are talking about here, is very minimum. There is barely any change when it comes to the focal length, and this is exactly what you want in a cinema lens. For photography, it doesn't really matter, right? Because you will take only one single shot. But when you are taking a video and you are trying to pull focus and you see your scene changing and the focal length changing a little bit, this can be very distracting in a scene or in a movie, right? So this is a very important aspect of cinema lenses. Another difference that you will see between cine lenses and photography lenses is how they measure aperture. Now, for photography lenses, aperture is measured in f-stops, while for cine lenses, it will be measured in t-stops. Now, f-stops is basically a calculation that depends on the diameter of the lens, while t-stops take into consideration the amount of light that will reach the sensor when the light passes through the lens. Meaning that if you take a photography lens that is at f2 and you put another lens that is at f2, you might have different exposure, which can be problematic for a specific scene when it comes to video, right? So with t-stops, when you change from, let's say, the 25 or the 35 or the 50 from a same set, you're basically guaranteed to have the same exposure and the same amount of light reaching the sensor, which is why typically people would prefer to work with t-stops instead of f-stops when it comes to movie and videos. The focus of photography lenses is typically sharpness. You want an image to be as clean and as sharp as possible with little to no chromatic aberration, sharp over the whole aperture range on the whole image if possible, so that you can really get a crisp and sharp image. And if you want to add some alteration or some style afterward in post, you can do so. On the other hand, when it comes to cinema, well, you want a lens to have characteristics. And characteristic is very hard to define, but it's basically the way the image is rendered through the lens and how the lens make the image feel overall, right? Let's say in the case of the Helios, that is a very well-known lens, right? The image is quite imperfect when it comes to sharpness and perfect rendering, right? You have a lot of flare, you have some lack of sharpness especially at high aperture, but you get a swirl and really a soft image that gives it a characteristic that people are actually looking for and are willing to pay a premium price for. So when it comes to a cinema lens, you won't necessarily get a picture perfect image, right? But typically lenses from a same set would give you some similar characteristic. That would be something that you would use in your image to convey emotion or convey a certain style. Now, mounting is also a big difference when it comes to photography and cinema lenses. Each maker make different mounts when it comes to photography. You have Fuji X mount, Sony E mount, the L mount, the Z mount, and so many mounts basically, as many mounts as there are makers usually. Now, those mounts are particular and important to respect because of the autofocus that we mentioned prior, right? Now, cinema lenses typically use a PL mount. PL stands for positive lock, and this mount is very popular because it allows you to really lock the lens in place. And when mounting focus motors or motors on the aperture or on the zoom, you are really able to use those motors without having to worry too much about the torque that is applied to the lens, because the lens is locked in place, which is not necessarily the case for photography lens, right? Because you typically rotate the lens and then it will lock. But if you start to apply, like some torque, that might damage your lens itself. And typically, cinema lenses come with PL mount, which is great because as long as you have a PL mount on your camera, or as long as you have an adapter that allows you to use PL mount, you are good to go. Another important aspect for cinema lenses is consistency. If you look at lenses from, let's say, Fujifilm, the XF18 or the XF33 or the XF56mm f1.4 have very different form factors, and the zoom ring as well as the aperture ring are placed at completely different area. Now, this doesn't really bother me as a photographer, but if I had to use those lenses in a rig, it will be a big problem, because if I have to change from one lens to another, I will need to change basically all my focus motors. Maybe I will need to change my lens supporter, and any other accessories that would be basically connected to the lens itself. However, thanks to the fact that CINE lenses from the same set have basically the same build, you are able to use the same gear without moving them between changing lenses, which facilitate greatly production overall. Now, this is true for the different focus or aperture ring, but it is also true for their filter thread and usually their outside diameter as well. Whether you want to use an inside filter, right? Let's say VND that you want to mount on the front of your lens, or if you want to use a matte box, you will be able typically in the same set to use the same diameter of filters, the same matte box, and pretty much the same everything, right? The goal is with cinema lenses to make sure that for a production environment, you waste as little time as possible between takes if you need to change the lens. And now I think that you can see why cinema lenses are typically a bit more expensive than photography lenses, even if they don't have autofocus capabilities. Because it's not only about the image quality that it produces, it's also about the whole housing of the lens, the whole fact that it has to be production ready, and also the fact that other lenses from the same set have to, also respect that particular requirements of filter thread, of ring placement, etc., to make sure that everything stays consistent throughout the set. Alright, so that is pretty much the differences that you have between photography lenses and cinema lenses. Let me know down in the comment if you have any questions. And by the way, I would be reviewing those lenses from DZO, the Vespid, as well as the RS Prime that they send me for test in the next, I think, 6 weeks. So if you have any questions about these lenses as well, let me know down in the comments, and I'll see you in the next one.